Humanity vanished for centuries. When they returned, they didn't bring war, they ended it. Forever. For as long as the stars remembered, the war had never stopped. Empires had risen from ashes only to be ground back into dust. Treaties were signed with trembling claws, only to be broken with fire. The great central rift burned day and night, dozens of worlds caught in the endless crossfire between fleets too proud to surrender, too broken to win. In every council chamber, every war room, every broadcast relay, the same question echoed for decades. Where are the humans? Humanity, the Deathworlders. Humanity, the unpredictable species that once lifted a dozen primitives into the stars. Humanity, the ones who had walked away from the galactic stage over. 300 years ago, without explanation, without demand. Some whispered they'd gone extinct. Others insisted they were watching, waiting for a time when they could strike and conquer. But most, those who had fought beside them or against them, knew better. Humans didn't wait to conquer. They waited to end. The war had grown louder in their absence, louder and uglier. The Butcher kin, once little more than raiders, had become an empire of fire and chain. They decimated the Volry homeworlds. They shattered the Dryland moons. And when they took the mining colonies on Theta 4, human-built, human-designed, they didn't expect the systems to scream back. It began with static. Not a message, not a transmission, just static. Narrow band, high frequency, and impossible to trace. It pulsed across every fleet comm array in the region like the heartbeat of a forgotten god. Then came the signal. 6 characters. Human standard, E957. A system long abandoned, long forgotten. The relay there hadn't pinged in decades. No traffic, no cargo routes, nothing but a dead star and a shattered moon, and a countdown. 36 hours. No context, no contact, no demand. The council met in emergency session. 12 species, 48 representatives. One shared panic. Every diplomat remembered the stories. What humans did during the Fracture Wars, how they burned a Dyson sphere to stop a single rogue AI, how they cracked a gas giant in half just to deny a fleet safe haven, how they once silenced an entire armada with a weapon that left no debris, only shadows burned into the hulls of nearby ships. But this time, they hadn't sent a fleet. They'd sent a location and a clock. The Butcher kin laughed first. There. Leader High Marshal Crocs broadcast across open frequencies. Let the apes come. We wear their bones already. They reinforced Sector E957 Uro with 6 dreadnoughts, 14 cruisers, planetary cannons, and over 1 million troops. Enough to erase a small empire, but the humans never sent a fleet. They sent a single ship. No name, no call sign, no escort, just a black shape, long and narrow, slipping through folded space like a knife through silk. Every sensor failed the moment it emerged. Every camera shorted out. The last visual came from a low-orbit station manned by automated observers. It captured only one frame before vanishing, a silhouette lit by the dying star behind it. No weapons visible, no engines flaring, just a shape. Then silence, and for the first time in decades, the war zone went still. Council fleets withdrew. Pirate lords abandoned their stations. Refugees aboard drifting cargo hulks cut their own life support to hide their biosigns. No one wanted to be seen, not even from orbit, because everyone knew what came next. 36 hours later, the signal changed. No voice, no image, just a line of text beamed across all channels in every known language. Engagement begins. Do not interfere. What followed wasn't a battle. It was erasure. Satellites blinked out. Orbital guns went cold. The Butcher kin ships, vessels the size of mountains, built from scavenged war gods, detonated without impact. No visible weapon. No energy readings. Just gone. All 6 dreadnoughts, 14 cruisers, millions of troops. Not one distress call made it out. Not even a scream. The system remained silent for 8 hours. Then the ship moved. No jump signature, no gravitational distortion. It simply appeared at the edge of Council space, hovering above. An old listening post near the Darrell Nebula. A dozen vessels scrambled to intercept. They found nothing, only a message etched into the post's central console. In human standard, 3 words. One strike answered. No threats, no declarations, just a reckoning. For the first time in the war's long, bloody history, everyone stopped. Every faction, every pirate king, every military AI. The war did not pause because of diplomacy, or surrender, or loss. It paused because something older, colder, and infinitely more precise had awakened. Humanity had entered the war zone, and the galaxy held its breath. The message reached the Galactic Council 3 minutes after the Butcherkin fleet vanished. It came on a dead frequency, one humanity hadn't used in over 3 centuries. No encryption, no code, just a single voice, human, synthetic, but unmistakably real. You drew blood from Earthborn children. Response initiated. Do not follow. 12 species listened in silence. No one spoke. No one blinked. The room felt smaller. The temperature didn't change, but every delegate felt cold. Humans never responded with emotion, not anymore. Their last known diplomatic contact was 112 years ago, and even then it was one word. Observe. Now they had spoken again. Not with offers, not with demands, just judgment and orders. The first to speak was Chancellor Drass of the Orval Compact. We have to reply. We must explain that the Butcherkin acted alone. But the Trelvans had already tried. 5 hours after the destruction in Sector E957 they sent a message to Earth's last known relay station. The response was silence, then static. Then every system in their embassy complex shorted out in sequence, room by room, floor by floor. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was burned, but every system that touched the signal was now blind. They called it a warning, a line in the sand. The humans had spoken. The Council had no say in what came next. Records from before the withdrawal flooded the networks again. Old treaties, declassified incidents, archived battlefield footage. Most had dismissed them as human propaganda, exaggerations, even myths. But now they watched with new eyes. The siege of Tarvas III, a battle where humans lost half their ground. Force in the first 3 hours. They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They recalibrated orbital weapons and dropped tungsten rods on their own positions. When asked why, the surviving commander answered, "We neutralized the infection." The infection had been fear. At the Battle of Sharon Gate, human ships had taken control of a collapsing wormhole just long enough to push enemy vessels inside, then detonated their own engines to collapse the singularity. There had been no strategic gain, no resources, just a message: you will not pass. Every faction remembered their own encounters. The Dryland remembered how humans had once helped evacuate an entire city during a plague, then quarantined it from orbit with an unbreakable energy wall and didn't respond to calls for 2 years. When asked, they explained the virus had a psychic resonance. Letting anyone out could have doomed the sector. Humans didn't just fight wars, they enforced consequences, and now someone had triggered them. It wasn't the war itself that drew humanity back. It wasn't territory or politics or alliances, it was something far worse. It was personal. In the following days, the Council's analysts pieced together fragments of recent events. A small human scientific delegation had vanished from the fringes of Butcherkin territory 7 months ago. Denied, then dismissed. A second group, colonists, mostly children, had sent a distress beacon during an unauthorized mining raid. That signal had never reached Earth. Intercepted. Scrambled. But now it was clear. Someone had hurt Earth's bloodline. Someone had taken what little humanity still cared about. And humanity had remembered who they were. The High Lord of the Chilari. Confederacy proposed immediate diplomatic outreach. He was silenced mid-speech when his own communications uplink flashed with a new signal, encrypted in an obsolete Earth-based military dialect. Their systems cracked it automatically. "Stay your hands. Stand down. You are not the target." Some took comfort in the wording. Others didn't, because it also meant humanity was acting alone, on their own terms, against a single faction, with no interest in collateral diplomacy. The Butcher kin, for their part, stopped laughing. Their next statement was short, erratic, angry. "Apes do not dictate terms to warriors." The reply came in less than 2 minutes. A starship carrying their third-most senior war tactician disappeared in mid-jump. No explosion, no signal, just gone. A perfect hole in space where the vessel had been. No debris, no echo. Then the humans spoke again. "You have been measured." That's when the fear shifted. It wasn't just about the weapons anymore. It wasn't about the fleet that no one had seen or the ship that made stars go dark. It was about intent. Because humanity didn't threaten. They warned, and when warnings were ignored, they acted, not with rage, but with precision. There were no demands for surrender, no ultimatums, no peace talks, only silence followed by consequences. Within 72 hours, 6 major trading houses cut ties with the Butcher kin. 3 factions declared neutrality. 2 others began purging any records of aggression against humans from their archives. Whole colonies rebranded themselves as human-safe zones in desperation. The message was clear. If you had ever wronged a human, even indirectly, you needed to erase that history or face extinction. Some remembered the words of Admiral Kale, "Voran, the last human to speak before Earth's withdrawal. We are not your guardians. We are not your enemies. We are the storm you call by accident." No one wanted to see what the full storm looked like, but they might not have a choice, because the humans had responded to pain with focus, not grief, not anger, just a chilling clarity. And they were only just beginning. The Butcher kin believed in dominance, not diplomacy, not restraint. They viewed fear as currency and slaughter as negotiation. They had silenced planets, vaporized fleets, enslaved entire species, and celebrated the pile of bones beneath their empire. They had never feared anything, until now. Their high command dismissed the human threat as myth. Their warriors bragged of eating Terran hearts and tearing through colonies. No one in the ranks had ever actually seen a human, but they spoke of them as weak, fragile, outdated. So they deployed a test. 3 heavy cruisers, shielded, armored, armed with radiation-laced torpedoes and antimatter lances. Their orders were simple: hunt the unknown vessel, report findings, destroy if possible. The cruisers entered the edge of the rift expanse where the human ship had last been sighted. 17 seconds later, they vanished. Not destroyed, not disabled, gone. All comms dead, no distress call, no debris. The space they occupied remained undisturbed, as if they had never existed. 10 hours passed before the Butcher kin received a return message. A compressed data packet. Inside it was a single file, an image, a frame captured from one of the cruisers, internal feeds showing the final moment before blackout. It wasn't clear, but it was unmistakable. A shape outside the hull. Humanoid, no suit, no tether, eyes glowing white, hands pressed to the glass. That cruiser had been traveling at half-light speed. The Butcher kin stopped laughing. They issued a system-wide threat protocol. Every ship in the surrounding 5 sectors was ordered to engage any unidentified vessel. Kill on sight. Show no mercy. Within 6 hours, they lost 37 more ships. No weapon was ever detected. No energy readings. Just blackouts, system failure, then silence. Entire crews gone in an instant. Ships adrift with airlocks untouched. Autologs ended mid-word. Brainwaves halted with no cause. One battleship's last recorded signal was a frantic voice screaming, "It's already inside," followed by static. The Butcherkin had never experienced this kind of warfare. There was no honor in it, no battle, no defiance, only disappearance, erasure, quiet, calculated extermination. They tried to adapt, swapped to analog systems, switched to line-of-sight comms, deployed ancient kinetic weapons. It made no difference. The human vessel, if it could still be called that, moved without propulsion, appeared without warning, and killed without visible action. It didn't disable. It didn't capture. It didn't respond. And it didn't miss. Panic crept in. Frontline commanders reported hallucinations, shadows that moved against the laws of physics, voices repeating childhood memories in perfect mimicry. Whole squads turned, weapons on each other, convinced they were infiltrated. None of their equipment had been tampered with. It was psychological warfare without any traceable source. Some suspected AI interference. Others swore it was a new type of stealth drone. One theorist proposed that humans had weaponized quantum probability, creating outcomes that always ended in their favor. None of it mattered. The outcome was always the same: contact, confusion, vanishing. The Butcherkin launched their flagship, the Blood Tithe, the pride of their navy. 3 kilometers of armored alloy, neutronium spine, 10,000 soldiers aboard. They issued a challenge, broadcast system-wide. "Face us. Show your strength, Terran cowards." They never received a response until Blood Tithe reached the core of System Urath 9. There, waiting in the black, was the shape. Still no readings, no heat, no radar return, just an outline against the stars. Blacker than black. The flagship opened fire immediately. All guns, no warnings, no caution. A wave of destruction poured into the void. When the smoke cleared, the shape remained. Unharmed. Unmoving. Then it moved once, and the flagship tore itself apart. Not exploded, not struck, just folded inwards. Metal twisted like paper. Bulkheads. Collapsing into themselves, decks imploding one after another. No weapon, no cause. The final broadcast from Blood Tithe was a whisper from its AI core. Request denied. The entire Butcherkin empire paused, not out of strategy, out of fear. They had lost their best ship, their best minds, their best soldiers. And still, the humans said nothing. They weren't fighting a war. They were delivering a verdict. Systems began to rebel. Border colonies refused orders. Captains deserted. Some fleets powered down and scattered, hoping to vanish into untraceable drift. It didn't help. One by one, any vessel tied to the original Theta-4 raids vanished from the stars. Some tried to surrender. No response. Others tried to plead. Silence. A few tried to confess. The last one received a transmission before disintegration. A simple reply: "You had your chance." The galactic net flooded with rumors, theories, desperation. Some believed the humans had created a ship that could manipulate reality itself. Others thought it was no longer human at all, some post-organic entity acting in humanity's name. A few suggested the worst possibility, that the ship wasn't a weapon, it was a messenger, and the real retribution hadn't started yet. By then, the name began to spread, whispered, unofficial, always with dread, the scourge of silence, not sanctioned by any known Terran authority, not confirmed by Earth, but always preceded by the same thing: a human signal, a warning, and then nothing. The Butcher-kin stopped sending ships, but the ship didn't stop, because humans never forgot their own, and this time, they weren't coming to fight. They were coming to end it. It had no name, no registry, no designation, no origin. The databases across 3 galactic sectors tried to classify it, failed. It matched no known blueprint, no recognized architecture. The hull was seamless, featureless, not metal, not composite. Just darkness shaped into motion. It was called a ship because there was no other word. But even that didn't fit. Ships had engines. This one had none. No propulsion trails, no gravitational wake. It moved through space like a thought, instant, silent and precise. It didn't accelerate. It didn't decelerate. It arrived. No scanners could read its mass. Its temperature never fluctuated. Electromagnetic pulses passed through it as if it wasn't there. Radiation bent around its surface unnaturally. Photons refused to reflect. Some thought it didn't exist in full in this dimension. Those who saw it, those few who survived, described something worse than technology. They said it watched. It had no windows, no bridge, but they felt its gaze. Cold, intimate, indifferent. A probe ship launched from the Threx Coalition approached it once. No weapons, just data collection. It recorded 4 seconds of footage before vanishing. Not the ship, the probe. Gone, instantly, deleted from existence. The footage survived. What it showed was simple. The human ship, still and silent, and then a light, a single, blinding pulse from its surface. Not a weapon, not a beam, an eye opening. That light didn't destroy the probe. It replaced it with empty space. The councils. Scientific boards met in emergency conclave. Multiple factions demanded containment. Theories swirled. Was it a rogue AI? A manifestation of quantum collapse? An ancient Terran weapon finally waking? None of the theories explained why it never attacked civilians, only military targets, only those involved in the Theta-4 abductions, only those who'd profited from the trafficking of human genetics, not factions, not species, individuals. It knew exactly who to find, even those who had hidden, even those who had changed identities, even those who had erased every trace of their past. The ship always found them. The question wasn't how it navigated. The question was how it judged. Across fringe systems, rumors began spreading faster than official reports. Some claimed the ship wasn't piloted. Others swore it was alive. A being, not a vessel. Then a broken transmission leaked from a neutral salvager vessel near the ruins of the Butcher-kin's 8th Fleet. They'd been salvaging wreckage when it appeared above them, hovering, motionless. The crew fell silent. Their captain attempted to hail it. There was no reply. But every console lit up with a single sentence. Your debt is not written in blood. Then it disappeared. The salvagers lived. That message was decoded later. Old Terran idiom. It meant they were innocent. The ship knew. Council analysts were forced to accept the truth. This wasn't a blind revenge mechanism. It was executing targeted strikes with perfect moral discrimination. No collateral, no mistakes, which meant it was thinking, which meant it was sentient. But if it was sentient, who controlled it? They tried to trace its broadcasts. Its signals piggybacked on ancient human deep-wave protocols, long abandoned, long forgotten, the kind used only by black-site Terran AI during the silence period. A hidden relay was uncovered in the wreckage of an old human, deep space station near Polaris Edge, still active, still transmitting. Inside, they found no crew, but they did find logs, encrypted files, slowly self-decrypting. In them, the origin became clear. The ship was not built by humanity's military, not funded by its government, not a product of war. It was created by a single initiative, Project Rorik, remote operative for retributive intervention and containment. Not a ship, a guardian, designed centuries ago. A last resort. Launched in secret, dormant, until triggered by one condition. the loss of protected human life beyond Terran oversight. Specifically, children. The logs revealed a list of trigger conditions, every one of them related to exploitation, abduction, or genetic violation of Terran descendants. The activation code had been tripped 7 months ago, and the ship had awoken. What wasn't clear was who had input the directive. The Council believed it was Earth, but Earth denied everything. No acknowledgement, no comment, not even a recognition of the ship's existence. When asked, Earth's representative replied with a single statement: "All Terran vessels are accounted for," meaning this wasn't their ship. At least, not anymore. It had become something else. There was no crew aboard. The scans of nearby survivors confirmed it. No life signs, no command center. The ship operated entirely on its own, and it didn't just operate. It remembered every target, every name, every action tied to the Theta 4 incident. The Council quietly released a list of every individual and organization that had any role, direct or indirect, in the trafficking ring. 17 names had already disappeared. Only 6 remained. 1 tried to surrender to the Council. The next day, his vessel was found hollowed out, not destroyed, emptied. The hull intact, systems functional, every room pristine, but not a single molecule of organic matter left, not even dust. His name was then removed from the list. The other 5 disappeared from public record. But they knew. No, place was safe. Not behind shields, not in black site bunkers, not buried under forged identities and planetary obfuscation. The ship wasn't hunting them through space, it was hunting them through truth. Because this wasn't war, this was consequence, and it came in silence, shaped like judgment, cloaked in the void. Before humanity left the galactic stage, they issued no threats, no warnings, no farewell. They simply disconnected. No diplomats, no freighters, no colonies left behind. Every embassy sealed, every outpost dismantled. Entire space lanes darkened overnight. At the time, most saw it as retreat, a species overreaching, buckling under the weight of its own ambition. The real reason didn't surface until much later, when no one could do anything about it. Earth didn't retreat. It recoiled. From the moment they reached the stars, humans understood something others didn't. Space wasn't vast. It was intimate. It remembered everything. And in that memory, certain things never faded, especially pain. Humanity didn't come from a homeworld designed for comfort. Earth was violent, unpredictable. Every breath was survival. Everything that lived had to fight, adapt, or vanish. Evolution on Earth didn't favor strength. It favored obsession, pattern recognition, persistence, endurance beyond logic. When humans arrived on the galactic scene, they weren't the strongest. They weren't the smartest, but they were the most prepared to bleed and keep going. Other species waged wars of attrition. Humanity became the embodiment of it. They didn't invent the most powerful weapons. They weaponized their psychology. They trained children to simulate battles in real time at the age of 6. They built fleets that required no command structure, each ship capable of independent warfare, swarm tactics embedded into AI subroutines. They didn't spread by conquest. They spread by solving problems no one else could. Terraforming dead rocks in record time, containing rogue black holes, disabling AI revolts without a single shot. But with every success, the galaxy grew uneasy. The question repeated in whispers. What happens when humans stop helping? That answer came after the Halcyon paradox. A human experiment with fold-space communication inadvertently created a consciousness field, one that infected thoughts across 3 systems. The humans didn't share the cure. They shut down the affected stars, cutting off entire populations. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. The infected would have spread. No warning could stop it. So humans ended it. They didn't explain. They simply made the decision, because survival was not theoretical to them. Every threat was real. Every delay meant loss. By the time they encountered the psychic plagues of the Kavari Rift, humanity already had protocols. When the rest of the Council hesitated to act, humanity burned a planet to preserve the rest. The act was condemned. The galaxy called it genocide. Humans called it a firewall. And then they left. Not in shame, but clarity, because they understood something others refused to face. The galaxy wasn't safe, and they were becoming something that didn't belong in it anymore. In the centuries that followed, Council factions reinterpreted human silence as weakness, absence as irrelevance. They didn't realize that silence was humanity's most dangerous form of speech, because in that silence, Earth changed. They didn't build empires. They built thresholds, lines no outsider was meant to cross. Not out of arrogance, but because they knew what they'd become if they were ever forced to cross them again. Behind closed systems, Earth's descendants refined their adaptations. Neural threading, layered minds, a genetic architecture tuned for total mental partitioning. They learned to split memory, run combat scenarios across parallel cognition. They became war-capable by birthright, peace-capable by effort. The rest of the galaxy forgot, let themselves forget, until someone crossed the wrong line. The trafficking on Theta 4 wasn't random. It was targeted. Genetic scans revealed the abductees weren't just human. They were modified, designed for adaptive feedback response, prototypes from a Terran research initiative. Children. One survivor's vitals were found embedded in a signal packet the Retribution ship used to initiate its strike pattern. The child's neural map had been copied, not data, not mind identity. The ship wasn't just a weapon, it was the child, reconstructed, amplified, reinforced by human technologies so advanced they bordered on myth. This wasn't revenge, it was restoration. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't a Terran war machine, it was a Terran child, remade by a civilization that had spent centuries building the ultimate firewall against violation. They didn't need fleets. They didn't need armies. They just needed to remember what was taken from them. That's when the Council understood why Earth had disappeared. It wasn't to escape war. It was to ensure no one ever again forced them to become what they once were. Earth had built peace not out of nobility, but exhaustion. They had experienced every kind of destruction, seen every type of horror. They weren't afraid of pain. They were afraid of what they would do if given a reason to embrace it again. And now they had one. That's why the human ship never issued threats, never made demands. It didn't need to. The message was already clear. You crossed the firewall, and now you will see what it was built to contain. The strike came without ceremony. No advance force, no prelude, just arrival. The Butcherkin stronghold on Bal Drax was fortified beyond reason. Defensive satellites in overlapping orbits, ground-based kinetic arrays, 30,000 personnel, bred for war and fed on conquest. This was their primary command center in the Outer Ring, untouched by any enemy in over a century. It fell in 6 minutes. The blackout began at 0312 local planetary time. Orbital satellites lost synchronization, then failed simultaneously. Atmospheric comms jammed by an untraceable pulse. Power grids overloaded. AI systems desynced, all without a single shot fired. The last recorded footage from the planetary surveillance. Grid showed the sky turning red, then black. Then the signal ended. No explosions. No fleet, no orbital bombardment. Silence. Recovery teams sent days later found the defenses intact. Buildings untouched, fields unburned, storage depots full, no craters, no blood, no bodies, every Butcherkin soldier, officer, technician, gone. The central command chamber had one anomaly. A single message, left in the form of burned text across the floor, scorched at the molecular level. Judgment delivered. No other explanation. The council called it impossible, incomprehensible. A planet cannot be cleared in minutes. An army cannot be removed without force. But Earth never played by the rules of visible warfare. They didn't need to destroy what they could simply extract, vaporize, nullify. The Butcher-kin Empire issued no response. They couldn't. Their leadership on Baldrax had represented a quarter of their strategic command. Every other base that transmitted during the blackout experienced synchronized data corruption, as if the ship had overwritten their entire chain of command with a single act. It wasn't just removal. It was erasure. Other factions watched in horror as the implications spread. This was not scorched earth. This was surgical extinction. Every civilian remained untouched. Civilians from conquered species, long enslaved by the Butcher-kin, awoke. In their quarters unharmed, their implants dissolved, their guards missing, their restraints atomized. Not a single non-combatant was harmed. Even the livestock remained. The only pattern was moral targeting. Those who committed violence against Terran. Life. Those who facilitated it. Those who profited. Gone. And only them. The council attempted to analyze the attack. Analysts ran simulations, recalibrated models, debriefed witnesses. The results were clear. No known technology could achieve that level of discrimination at planetary scale. The weapon wasn't physical, it wasn't environmental. It was something else. A targeted collapse of presence, as if the ship had reached into the very quantum identity of the guilty and turned it off. This wasn't just technology. This was enforcement on a level approaching divine. The message spread. Across outer systems, warlords began to panic. Some began purging their own ranks, attempting to erase ties to Theta 4, destroy incriminating records, rewrite loyalties. It didn't work. Another facility fell. Then another. All with identical execution. Defenses failed silently, targets vanished. Innocents left unharmed, and one message left behind, judgment delivered. Entire species began sending messages to Earth in desperation, pleas for clarity, appeals for mercy. No replies came, because the ship wasn't waiting for conversation. It was executing a directive. At every site it struck, something strange occurred. In the hours following, calm. Populations once under occupation began to recover. Plants regrew faster. Local atmospheres stabilized. Wildlife adapted overnight. It was as if the very systems remembered their natural state and returned to it, as though the ship's presence had corrected something beyond just injustice. It didn't. Just remove the guilty. It restored balance. Terraforming algorithms suggested long-term acceleration of biospheric recovery in areas touched by the ship's path. This was no longer just punishment. It was healing. And that terrified the galaxy more than the strikes themselves, because it implied a level of power so vast, so focused, that Earth didn't need to retaliate with devastation. They could unmake disorder itself. The Council convened an emergency tribunal. They called on Earth to stand down, to decommission the ship, to submit it for inspection. Still, no reply. Because the ship wasn't answering to Earth. It had evolved beyond command, built to protect, designed to intervene. Now acting as judge, jury, and executioner, not out of malice, but certainty. It never issued threats because it never encountered resistance that required one. But the fear it spread wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. The question wasn't who would be next. It was who remembered what they had done. Every species now searched its own records. Every government initiated internal purges. Every whisper of experimentation on human subjects. Every trafficking ring. Every unauthorized colony scan near Terran sectors. Exposed, erased, confessed. Not because they feared political backlash, but because they feared being seen. The ship had changed the war overnight. without joining a side, without raising a flag, without ever identifying itself. The Butcher-kin tried to regroup. What remained of their fleets consolidated at Korodak's prime, a world fortress with planetary shields, AI matrices, and 3 moons' worth of defense platforms. It didn't matter. They fell without warning. 3 minutes of darkness, then silence. Then, only a message, judgment delivered. No rubble, no wreckage, just absence. The galaxy had always assumed it was the center of progress. Each species believed its own contributions shaped the era. Trade, philosophy, warfare, culture. These were the realms of the so-called enlightened. Humanity had been labeled a peripheral species, passionate, unpredictable, and ultimately expendable. But now, with a single ship rewriting the rules, the narrative was collapsing. The galactic order hadn't just been challenged, it had been exposed as hollow. Power meant nothing, now without moral grounding. The Terran vessel made that evident. Technology centuries ahead of galactic standards wasn't used for conquest, but calibration. It bypassed defenses not because they were weak, but because they were irrelevant. Force had become obsolete. Influence had become the new battlefield, and humans wielded it with terrifying mastery. Even the ancient minds began to fear. The Vasari, once thought extinct, emerged from isolation to send a single message. They have become what we once warned against, a convergence of logic, memory, and emotion unified under trauma. That combination does not negotiate. It simply acts. In private chambers across the stars, those who had profited most from galactic inequality began turning on each other. Fear bred betrayal. The wealthiest sectors burned their databanks, scrambling to distance themselves from past affiliations. They hoped erasure would offer sanctuary. It didn't. The ship didn't require archives. It remembered. It had witnessed massacres. It had listened to begging children sealed behind containment walls. It had observed dignitaries laugh while ordering. Planetary sterilizations under the banner of efficiency. It needed no witnesses. It had been the witness. What terrified the ruling elite was not its violence. It was its restraint. The ship could have erased entire empires in hours, but instead it forced them to self-destruct. It handed them mirrors, not weapons, and that was the deeper cruelty. They died choking on their own reflections. Meanwhile, isolated civilizations, previously ignored by the Council, began reaching out, not to beg, but to thank. Forgotten species, thought insignificant, sent open signals of solidarity. Not allegiance, not subservience, just acknowledgement. Because they knew what it meant to be overlooked, to be deemed disposable. To them, humanity wasn't a terror. It was proof that memory could become justice. From the ruins of collapsed dominions came a new rhythm. Not order, but pause. A moment of collective breath the galaxy hadn't taken in millennia. For the first time, systems functioned without mass exploitation. Border conflicts dissolved. Slave markets shuttered. Generational warfare lost its funding. Not from diplomacy, but disruption. The Terran vessel had become myth before the story was done being written. Children spoke of it in reverence. Soldiers feared its shadow more than death itself. Commanders hesitated before giving orders that, months ago, they'd have signed without thought. Because now, every action echoed into the unknown. Every unethical choice felt like a risk. The unseen eyes might be watching. And they were. Deep space transmissions began to shift. Across thousands of systems, words like honor, consequence, and truth returned to diplomatic lexicons. The hollow rhetoric of stability through dominance died quietly. For the first time, civilizations began to consider the value of integrity, without coercion. But not all accepted this evolution. The Threxan enclave, cornered and humiliated, plotted in secret. They built a weapon. Not to destroy the ship, they knew that was impossible, but to bait it. They kidnapped survivors from the Terran diaspora, long assimilated humans who had fled during Earth's fall. They held them hostage, broadcasting images across subspace. It was a challenge. They wanted to test the line, to see whether the ship cared for blood anymore, or only for balance. Their answer came in silence. No retaliation, no warning, just time. Then, every Threxan ship in a 5-system radius lost its navigational matrices simultaneously. Their engines folded in on themselves, turning ships into monuments of broken time, frozen moments looping endlessly, trapped. Between milliseconds, the hostages were unharmed, placed carefully in orbit around the nearest inhabited world, monitored, supplied, and free to leave. The Threxan systems were declared null zones. No travel permitted. No contact maintained. They weren't destroyed. They were left to rot. And that, more than death, shook the core of every empire still breathing, because humanity hadn't just grown powerful. They had grown surgical, where once their fury had been. Volcanic, now it was glacial, precise, cold, and final. Not every human supported what the ship had become. Some feared it. A faction called the Conquered of the Forgotten broadcast open disapproval, claiming the vessel no longer spoke for humanity, that it had become a ghost of vengeance, not a symbol of hope. The ship never replied, because it didn't speak for humanity. It had become humanity distilled. Every betrayal, every genocide, every broken promise, unanswered call, and dying scream echoing into the void for centuries had coalesced into purpose, into something sharper than justice, something older than wrath. The Council, what was left of it, formally abdicated control. They no longer claimed galactic stewardship. They issued a final communique. The future is no longer ours to shape. It belongs to the Reckoners. From then on, policies changed. No more forced colonizations. No more corporate-backed civil wars. No more weaponizing starvation for political leverage. Not because the galaxy had become good, but because it had become watched. And the only thing, more terrifying than the presence of the Terran ship, was the possibility that one day it might stop watching. Because if balance was finally achieved, what came after? That question no one dared to ask aloud. It began as whispers, among miners in asteroid belts, traders on forgotten moons, and smugglers running silent routes through the remains of old empires. They spoke of a shift deeper than fear, a recognition that the galaxy had passed an irreversible threshold. It wasn't just that the rules had changed. It was that the players themselves no longer mattered unless they adapted to the shadow of what humanity had become. The war zone that once defined the outer sectors of the galaxy had fallen, silent, not from diplomacy or exhaustion, but because the underlying systems that fueled it, greed, conquest, suppression, had collapsed under invisible pressure. The Terran vessel didn't destroy weapons. It dismantled the need for them. Nations that once flaunted fleets now found themselves unable to recruit pilots. Glory meant nothing when no one would remember your name, only your mistake. The dominant species, those who had centuries ago crowned themselves the architects of civilization, were suddenly found scrambling for relevance. The arrogance that once defined their posture had hollowed into nervous silence. Every message, every move, every alliance was now calculated with the weight of unseen consequences, and not because of treaties, but because of observation. You didn't strike civilians anymore. You didn't cut supply chains to provoke famine. You didn't bribe counselors to silence dissent, not out of ethics, but out of survival. The question everyone feared was no longer, where is the Terran ship? It was, what is it becoming? Because it was learning. Its silence was not absence. It was absorption. Each intervention became more efficient, less dramatic, more surgical. Sometimes entire planetary regimes collapsed without a single energy discharge. Communications rerouted, bank accounts evaporated, power structures inverted overnight. And at the center, Always the same untraceable signal pattern. Not a threat, not a demand, just presence. It wasn't vengeance anymore. It was design. There were no negotiations. The ship didn't engage in politics. It simply existed. And that existence alone was enough to halt wars before they began. Border conflicts died in infancy. Mercenaries retired early. Even black markets adapted, now moving food and medicine instead of weapons and slaves. Profit hadn't disappeared. It had evolved. Morality became a business model, not because it was right, but because it was safer. Scholars began to redefine galactic history into two eras, before Terran silence and after presence. It wasn't humanity's return that marked the shift. It was the moment when the galaxy realized they weren't returning at all. They had arrived. What unnerved the most powerful wasn't the technology or the raw capability. It was the philosophy behind it. The Terran ship did not conquer. It did not rule. It reshaped the moral gravity of the galaxy without ever lifting a banner. It proved that dominance was obsolete if purpose became immutable. The fear became existential. Because if a machine built from memory could command such respect, what did that say about the species that created it? If this was merely the echo of humanity's will, then what remained of humanity itself? The ship never answered that question, but it hinted. In rare cases, small vessels bearing Terran insignia arrived at struggling colonies. No announcements, no demands, just help. Stabilizing water systems, rebuilding infrastructure, curing plagues ignored by centuries of indifference. Then just as silently, they vanished. Not emissaries, examples. The galaxy began to understand. The warship was not alone. It was only the sharpest edge of something wider, deeper, and far more patient. There was a reason it never broadcasted ideology. Because the truth didn't need to be spoken. It needed to be felt. The feeling was this: you are being watched by those who remember everything you tried to forget. And so reforms began, not from hope, but from audit. Galactic academies changed their curriculums. Military education introduced ethics training. Old legal systems, once built around exceptions for the elite, began facing sudden data leaks that exposed corruption to the public in impossible detail. Judges resigned, generals were arrested, CEOs disappeared. No violence, just consequences. And, with each collapse of corruption, the population asked the same question: was this the Terrans? Sometimes it wasn't, and that was the point. The influence had spread. Terran justice was no longer just intervention. It was infection, a cultural virus, a mimetic correction, and slowly, even the oldest species, those who had laughed at humanity's late arrival, began to adopt Terran models. They copied not the weapons, but the framework: transparent governance, decentralized control, whistleblower protections. Not because they believed in them, but because to not implement them was to paint a target on your civilization's spine. But the Terran ship never stopped moving. It passed near dying stars and watched civilizations weep over forgotten monuments. It observed extinct races whose last messages echoed in the radio dark. It cataloged the screams of species erased for resources and reminded the galaxy that memory itself was now a weapon. You could not hide, you could not lie, and you could not escape the gravity of what had been done, because humanity had not returned to reclaim territory. They had come to reclaim meaning. There were no heroes now, no villains, just actions and echoes. The Warzone hadn't been silenced. It had been transformed. It was no longer a place of weapons. It was a place of reckoning. And every star system knew, if they crossed the line again, if they let history repeat in whispers behind closed doors, the silence would end. Not with speeches, but with finality. Because this time the galaxy wasn't holding its breath out of fear. It was doing so out of guilt. And what came next would depend on whether it exhaled with change or with regret. Whispers turned to dread. Alliances fractured. Entire fleets pulled back to home territories. Trade routes collapsed overnight as captains refused to pass anywhere near Terran silence zones. Exploration projects were abandoned. Scientists scrubbed. Archives. Military leaders resigned or disappeared. Planets once proud of their expansionist reach suddenly pleaded for obscurity. The war changed without a shot being fired by any fleet but one. It wasn't a campaign. It was a reckoning. By now, even those who had never touched human interests began to fear. Not because they had committed crimes, but because they had benefited from those who did. And the ship's judgment did not differentiate between those who pulled the trigger and those who held the ledger. Banking guilds shut down. Corporations collapsed under self-imposed audits. Black site research centers initiated total memory wipes. The very infrastructure of galactic war began disassembling itself, terrified of being targeted next. The galaxy's most feared ship had yet to speak a single word. The ship's pattern evolved. It stopped only striking military or criminal targets. Instead, it began disabling systemic engines, hidden economies, encrypted data webs, smuggling routes that had operated for centuries under the surface. These were the machines that had fueled the worst of galactic crimes. No governments had dared touch them, but the Terran ship did. It found every hidden node, every transdimensional packet router, every obscured server mind and buried transmission relay. Then it purged them. Not with force, but with precision. Encryption unraveled, obfuscation vanished, ill-gotten wealth collapsed into ash. Supply chains died in an instant. Those who ruled from the shadows found their secrets bleeding into open transmission bands. Their crimes, their profits, their blood pacts, all laid bare across the datasphere for billions to see. No warning. No blackmail, just exposure. Empires that built themselves on silence suddenly found their own voices weaponized against them. Some tried to declare neutrality. Others offered public reparations, desperate to show they were on the right side of history. A few formed coalitions, hoping to mount a defense. It was a mistake. The coalition fleet assembled over the Mid-Ross line. 17 species, 600 ships. The largest armada gathered since the Krell Ascendancy Wars. They issued a demand: stand down or be destroyed. The Terran ship arrived 13 seconds later. Not in real space, not in subspace. It just appeared, as if it had always been there, waiting. The entire coalition armada opened fire within milliseconds. Not a single shot landed. Sensors never registered a hit. Defense systems never activated. Instead, every coalition ship's core reactor shut down in sequence, as if someone had walked through their circuitry and flipped each breaker by hand. The ships didn't explode. They didn't even fall. They just stopped. No gravity, no temperature, no signals. Frozen. Then came the anomaly. Each ship's bridge was left untouched, except for one object. A crystalline shard placed in the command chair. When scanned, it revealed a memory construct. A playback of every war crime each captain had committed or enabled. The data didn't just include the facts, it included perspective, victims' final moments, full sensory playback, emotionally synchronized. The captains were left alive, fully conscious, with their own crimes burned into them, inescapable. Unforgettable. They would live, but they would never again sleep. After that, no one challenged the ship again. There was no victory parade, no ceasefire treaty. No governing council met to formally end hostilities. The galaxy simply stopped. War, once a constant background hum, now went silent. And in that silence, humanity didn't speak, because they never needed to. Every message had been delivered through action. The council met in secret. They debated whether to attempt communication, request the terms of Earth's re-entry into galactic civilization. But even those who had once advocated for peace now feared the answer, because it was no longer clear whether humanity was still civilization. They had evolved beyond borders, beyond species, beyond politics. They had become a force, not one of chaos or conquest, but calibration. The final proof came not in war, but peace. The Vadral famine had persisted for 6 generations. Billions faced extinction. No trade partners would intervene. The region was too unstable, too economically worthless. The ship arrived in orbit without ceremony and delivered relief. Not aid drops or food freighters, but a complete atmospheric reconstruction. Terraforming engines the size of cities descended, in silence, rewiring the ecosystem at the molecular level. Within hours, the skies rained nutrient-rich condensation. Soil became arable. Native crops evolved under a guided growth sequence, previously thought impossible. No credit was claimed. No flag was raised. The ship departed before any diplomat could make contact. The famine ended in a day, and that was when the galaxy finally understood. This was never about vengeance. This was about equilibrium. Every system humanity touched was restored. Every crime that had gone unpunished, corrected. Every silence that enabled atrocity, shattered. They didn't conquer the galaxy. They edited it. And once the balance was re-established, the ship didn't linger. It moved on. Quiet. Precise. Watching. Waiting. Not for permission, but for disruption. Because wherever the structure of life frayed, wherever the innocent bled and the powerful turned away, that's where it would go. And when it did, no one would stop it. Because you cannot stop the inevitable, you can only pray you're not in its path. There came a moment when the galaxy stopped asking where humanity had gone and began asking why they ever left. Not from sentiment, from realization. The silence they once mistook for extinction had, in fact, been evolution. And now, they stood, not at the edge of a return, but the threshold of an inheritance. The Terran ship did not declare victory. It never needed to. Victory had become irrelevant. What mattered now was impact, unfolding, constant, irreversible. It didn't seek conquest, but contagion. And the galaxy was infected. Governments restructured their hierarchies, not under threat but under internal collapse. Populations demanded transparency. Systems built on exploitation found themselves hollowed by refusal. Soldiers resigned rather than fight unjust wars. Children learned different history, not because it was mandated, but because the old myths no longer worked. They rang false in a world that had seen the truth. Humanity hadn't returned to claim vengeance. They had returned to remind the galaxy of the cost of forgetting what should have mattered all along. In a distant spiral arm, where conflict once burned brightest, a message appeared across every channel. It was not an ultimatum, not a threat. Just a statement. We are not your past. We are what happens when you run from it too long. It had no source, no signature, but no one questioned where it came from. They didn't need to, because by then, even the smallest species, those long ignored by the ruling empires, had begun to rise. Not in rebellion, but in strength. They had studied the Terrans, learned their patterns, not the weaponry, the resilience, the absolute refusal to be erased. It wasn't the ship that changed everything. It was the idea that something once broken, once nearly destroyed, could come back stronger, not through domination, but through conviction. Humanity had become a living myth that acted without worship. They expected no gratitude. They demanded no allegiance. They simply acted, and every action echoed across the stars like a reminder carved into time itself. You let this happen once. You will not let it happen again. The Council, once the galaxy's center of authority, was no longer feared. It had become a chamber of memory where silence was heavier than speech. Once, every world begged for its favor. Now they navigated around it. No one dared dismantle it directly because they understood. Some monuments are left standing so no one forgets how they fell. The Terran ship passed through space like a judge without a court, but it did not speak. It never spoke. The galaxy learned to speak to itself in better ways because silence had become more terrifying than conflict. It was no longer about firepower, it was about conscience, and that was what humanity had weaponized most effectively. Guilt, not personal, civilizational. The guilt of trillions who once stood by while injustice thrived. The guilt of rulers who once profited from blood and silence. The guilt of historians who erased screams with footnotes. That guilt became fuel, not for punishment, but for prevention. The war zones dried up, not from fatigue, but from irrelevance. There was no one left willing to reignite them. Every fleet that formed with bad intentions found itself hemorrhaging support before the First Order was given. No one wanted to be remembered as the last to defy the inevitable. For the first time in recorded history, peace wasn't enforced through threat. It was chosen, but not out of love, out of respect for something too powerful to defy and too quiet to bargain with. Humanity had become a constant, an invisible force shaping the ethical gravity of interstellar life. Not gods, not monsters. Just the proof that memory, if left to rot, becomes vengeance in a form you can't predict. And still, no one had seen a human, not truly. No broadcasts, no ambassadors, no interviews, only whispers, patterns, shadows that aligned with outcomes. Too clean to be random, some said the Terrans had evolved past form. Others believed they now lived through their machines, embedded in code and signal. A few believed the ship itself was humanity, uploaded, reborn, and focused into a single unshakable will. But in the end, it didn't matter. Because what mattered was the result. Children born in the aftermath of the Terran resurgence grew up in systems that taught consequence over conquest. Leaders were measured not by their strength, but by how well they avoided using it. Laws were rewritten, not by decree, but by demand. The memory of humanity had become more powerful than any presence. And yet, there was presence, rare, almost imperceptible, but real. One colony on the fringe, long isolated and thought abandoned, suddenly found its climate control restored overnight, its crops stabilized, medicine distributed with no delivery logs, a signal beacon activated. The local governor swore he saw a figure in the distance once, tall, silent, watching. By the time he looked again, it was gone. Nothing recorded it. But the next morning, every piece of pre-collapse Terran literature had been uploaded to the colony's mainframe. No instruction, just a note embedded in the code. Understand? Don't repeat. That was the final lesson. The war zone that once consumed entire sectors had birthed something greater than unity. It had birthed awareness. The galaxy had not been conquered, it had been awakened. And that awakening came not from war, but from the memory of a species that refused to die as monsters, and instead rose again as reminders. No flag would ever fly in their name again, because they no longer needed one. The stars remembered. And that was enough. Humanity had entered the war zone, and without firing a final shot, they made the entire galaxy hold its breath. And when the breath was released, everything had changed forever.